Hello and welcome to Iowa Talking Points. I'm Jeff Stein from News Talk 1540 KXCL. Thank you for joining us for another in this series of conversations concerning issues of interest to Americans generally and Iowans in particular. This program was produced in the afternoon of Friday, September 29th, 2023, in front of a studio audience within Studio 5 at Mudd in Cedar Falls. And we welcome to Iowa Talking Points Republican presidential candidate and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. Governor Burgum grew up in the small town of Arthur, North Dakota. After college, he was one of the founders of a small computer software business, Great Plains Software, that ultimately became a global billion-dollar endeavor. They ultimately sold that company to Microsoft. He was elected governor in 2016, and as governor, he inherited a $1.7 billion budget shortfall. He not only led the effort to balance that state budget, but later signed the largest tax cut in North Dakota history. He holds a degree from North Dakota State University and an MBA from the Stanford Business School. Welcome to Governor Doug Burgum. The format of our program is rather simple, a conversation about some of the key topics of interest to you, the voters. I'll be joined in the questioning by Gentry Collins. Mr. Collins is CEO of the American Free Enterprise Chamber of Commerce, and by Rob Mudd, Chief Futurist at Mudd Advertising. Welcome to all. And to the members of our studio audience, if you have questions, jot them down on the cards that we've provided and we'll pick them up midway through this program so we can ask your questions to start the second half of our conversation. Include your first name if you would, and above all, please write legibly. Governor Burgum, you have been on a lot of the national programs, on the stage for both debates, but some people may just not be familiar with your backstory. So tell us a bit about some of the things that I talked about in the bio and how you got to be to the point where you're with us today.
Well, thank you, Jeff, Gentry, Rob. First of all, great to be with all of you. But yeah, growing up in the small town of Arthur, fantastic, but like a small town in the Midwest that you might expect or anywhere in Iowa, it's 300 people. The streets were gravel when I was growing up. It was, the grain elevator, the Case IH dealer, the drugstore, a couple grocery stores. I mean, that was the town. You knew everybody, everybody knew you, and it was a fantastic place to grow up. And everything I did growing up, working on the farm, working at the grain elevator that my family was involved with, working on the ranch, even worked as a chimney sweep to pay my way through North Dakota State through college. I mean, these were all jobs where I took a shower at the end of the day, not at the beginning of the day. And I think that's, helped me understand what America is today. I mean, America runs. I mean, people that get up and work for a living when their farms, our factories, our oil fields, they're all heroes to me because they're the ones that make things work. And my dad and mom, incredible role models. And my dad grew up in the same town. And when Pearl Harbor happened in 1941, he went down the road to Castleton 15 miles away and signed up for the Navy. And he'd never seen an ocean. I don't think he knew how to swim because there's no swimming pool in Arthur and there's no lakes and rivers near Arthur. I mean, but he did that, out of a heart of service. And that's kind of what I was taught in our family. But he had, because he'd got a college degree, he was made an officer. They had a program in as fast as we were building ships. They were turning college graduates into naval officers. And he ended up on a destroyer. Between when he enlisted and got sent to sea, he proposed and married mom. Then they didn't see each other to the end of the war. It was over 2.5 years later when he finally got to see her again. There's 151 destroyers at Okinawa. 129 got hit by kamikazes. There's the half of the MIAs of all of U.S. history is about 80,000. There's 80,000 missing in action in the U.S. military. Half of those since the Revolutionary War are U.S. Navy sailors whose ships went down in the Pacific. So it's only by the grace of God I'm even standing here today, or I guess I'm sitting today, but that we're here together. But it was, so he came back. They just started a family. I had an older brother and older sister, and because our life was perfect. And my dad passed away when I was a freshman in high school, and that was hard. But I learned a lot of things from that. I got to see my mom, who was a widow with 3 kids. I understand what economic insecurity is, and that she, going back to work. Estate taxes were super high in those days, almost 60%. The little farmland we had, she was worried about losing that. So, going through all of that. And then fast forward to, after college, after grad school, and I was working, I saw my first Apple II computer, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. Look what look at that, VisiCalc was their first spreadsheet. And I was like, that's going to change the world. So I literally from that moment on said, I've got to get into the PC software business, and the only asset I had was 160 acres of farm ground, as you would all know here in Iowa, not enough for dry land wheat farming. So I mortgaged the farm. I mean, it was people like, don't do it, it's too risky. Not something you do when your grandparents have homesteaded and it's paid for, but I mortgaged the farmland. That became the seed capital. He called me the founder. Technically, I wasn't. There was a couple guys that had started it as a computer store. I met them. I said, let's start a software company. They're technically the founders, but I provided the seed capital. I wrote the business plan for the software side of the business, and away we went. There was less than 10 of us at the beginning. And 18 years later, we were an overnight success story. But we had 2,000 team members, 1,200 in Fargo, 400 rest of North America, 400 rest of the world. We had customers in 132,000 countries. Everybody said you can't build a global tech company in North Dakota. We did, and we did it with small town kids. We had kids from 220 different small towns. And if a kid grew up working on a farm, working on a dairy farm, whatever, they went straight to the front of the line for hiring because we knew they knew how to work, and we could teach them what they needed to know. And we were on the Fortune 100 best places to work in America 5 years in a row. We had one of the most successful NASDAQ IPOs. So when I think about kids in the Midwest, and I just say, wow, you give us a level playing field, our farmers, our ranchers, even technology doesn't matter, we can compete with anyone. And when I was leading that company and you had people working for you around the world, I had people that worked for me that, that didn't have the right to vote. You have people in some countries today, women can't vote. You've got people that don't have the right to assemble. Many people don't have the ability to, don't have the Second Amendment. They don't have rights to carry guns. So you see that, and then you realize, even as a kid growing up in a small town, you have an understanding of how great America is and how we got to fight to defend what we have. So, and then fast forward to 2016, there was an open seat for governor, and I came home and said to Catherine, hey, I'm thinking about jumping in this race. Never had run for anything before, and she, when she tells it was kind of like, what? Like, what? Whoa. But I knew that at that time, we were facing this huge budget crisis in the state. Oil prices had collapsed. You've got the challenge of taking $1.7 billion of cost out of a $6 billion, 27% of the general fund, still keep the trains running. So we jumped in the race, same like right now, everyone says, oh, you can't win, you're too far behind. We got into that race in January, and we were down 59% in the polls, and we won the primary by 20, we won in the fall in general by 40, we won again in 2020 by over 40 points. So we've won 2 races in 16 and 20 for governor by the highest margins of any gubernatorial candidate those years in the country. So it is, in the formula, and the reason you say, why is that possible, is because we just approach this as our job is to serve everybody. If you want to be in the legislature, if you want to be in Congress, put on a red shirt and a blue shirt, lob stuff, get on social media, attack each other, throw names around. But if you're in the executive branch, it's just like being in business. And I said, we got to treat the taxpayers like customers. We've got to serve them. And if we're serving them like customers, like we had to in the software business, we had to be better, faster, smarter, cheaper, more responsive tomorrow than we were today. And if you weren't, you're out of business. There's no tariffs in software. There's no subsidies in software. It is wide open competition. For 30 years, I learned how to compete, and you compete by focusing on the value you're bringing to the customer, building trust. And like our grain elevator in our hometown that my grandfather started in 1906, my dad, when he was alive, when I was 7 years old, he took me out in the driveway of that grain elevator, and he taught me how to take a clean sample. You know why he did that? Because we had customers coming to our elevator that were driving past neighboring elevators. And I'm like, Dad, why did they come here? Why didn't they go to the closer one? He goes, well, one transaction 2 generations ago, somebody screwed Grandpa, and he said, I'm never going back there again. And he taught his kid who taught his kid, and they're still driving an extra 12 miles to come to our elevator. So you build trust one transaction at a time. The cleanest sample means the farmer gets paid the most for that truckload, not the least. And that's what we brought into the software business. We said, hey, we're going to treat our customers like they're the only ones we're ever going to have. Because in a grain elevator, your customers are at the 100th anniversary of that grain elevator celebration, in the Arthur gym, the gym that I grew up playing basketball in, the high school gym, we had my brother and my cousin and I were on stage, and we had a general ledger journal from the 1920s. And my brother and cousin were reading the names of the customers. and it was the Olsons and the Johnsons and the Thompsons and the Stibbies and the Zimmermans and the Steffuses, and their grandkids and grandkids were sitting, great-grandkids were sitting in the gym. Mm-hmm. We were serving the same families that we started serving in the early 1900s, because that farmland doesn't change. Mm-hmm. So I understand that you build trust, and that's what our country needs right now more than anything in leadership, is someone you can trust.
And so those are the skill sets, the foundational points that brought you to where you are. But it's a different thing with the swamp in Washington. Whatever issues each state may have, I would suggest they're not as significant or as deep as the ones in Washington. So how can you come in from North Dakota and fix what's wrong with Washington enough to be effective as president?
Well, I think this is an easy question, because I'm standing on the stage on Wednesday night and I look across, and I said that night, I said, wow, there's 100+ years of government service across here, and I thank everybody for their service. But you're not going to take career politicians to fix problems that were created by politicians. I mean, it's going to take an outsider, a business person, and again, now none of the challenges that we're facing in government actually are related to technology and productivity. We got too many people doing it the old-fashioned way, the same way we do it at the state level, and we've underinvested in what it would take to shrink government. And so you apply the skill set, because technology is changing every job, every company, every industry. It's going to change our military. Right now it is, but it hasn't changed core government. We're still doing it the old-fashioned way. And you say, oh, what's he talking about? Well, I mean, I bet you everybody here and every place I go and every group, everybody's got a smartphone. They got a supercomputer in their pocket. And I go, how many of you have got, smartphone? Everybody. I said, how many of you have got over 100 apps on your phone? Pretty much everybody. Mm-hmm. How many of you have an app from the federal government? Nobody. I mean, nobody's got one. Everybody's doing their banking, their shopping, their weather, their news. I mean, they're doing it on this incredible tool that they have with them. But then when it comes back, we got to fill out a form, you got to drive to an office, take a number, get your license renewed. I mean, all of these things, can be massively improved. And I just say, hey, 10 to 20% of every government job is some mind-numbing, soul-sucking work that the best, most motivated, most heartfelt, I joined to be in government to make a difference in people's lives, because those people do exist in government. They went into public service because they wanted to make a difference. And part of their job they hate, because there's a regulation that's outdated, there's a rule, there's a law from 10, 20, 30 years ago, they got to make a report that nobody reads. You eliminate that work, you eliminate 20% of the work the federal government's doing, you've just eliminated 20% of the cost of government. And if those folks can go to work in the private sector, we have 10 million jobs open in the private sector. And then I believe in the Constitution. It drives my thinking all the time. And the 10th Amendment, 28 words. These are the powers delegated, to the federal government. Mm-hmm. People need to ask, who delegated to the federal government? The states did. The states created the federal government, not the other way around. The states did. And then it says, and that's the limit of their responsibilities. The rest are reserved for the states, or for the people. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff. When you say, how do you fix the swamp in DC? Part of it is, there shouldn't be a swamp in DC. Part of it, the way you drain the swamp is say, this is going back to the states, or like I said earlier, at least 20% of it is adding no value to anyone. I mean, just stop doing it. And you say, well, how do you stop doing it? Well, it turns out both parties hate red tape. I mean, we passed 51 red tape reduction bills in North Dakota this year. I mean, we target it. We had a place where we were crowdsourcing ideas from the public. How is the government getting in your way? How can we get rid of it? It's not that hard. I mean, they say, oh, no one will agree on anything. Everybody hates red tape. Industries hate it, families hate it, schools hate it, businesses hate it, small businesses especially hate it, and a lot of the stuff so what we say is sort of a day one thing, it's innovation, not regulation. Innovation has driven the American success story for well over a century. Regulation is what's choking us now, and it's part of the reason that we've got the high cost and the high inflation, and certainly anybody that's in farming today understands how regulation is choking that industry.
Again, you're from North Dakota, and there may be some on the coast, not people in Iowa. We know how good people in the Midwest are, but they may say, well, you're from North Dakota. What do you know about global affairs? What do you know about a border situation? But as governor of that state and having run a global business, you've got insight that many of those career politicians on that stage the other night that you mentioned don't have.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for recognizing that. That's absolutely true. I mean, of course, we've got a 360-mile border with Canada. We have 18 places where you're supposed to come across. But we've also been, during my tenure as governor, sending people to the southern border. And I've been down to the southern border more times than Biden. That's easy because he's only been down there once. But we've got a group of North Dakota down there leading a year-long mission, flying Lakota helicopters with night vision in cooperation with the Border Patrol from San Diego to the Gulf Coast. And their whole job is to be trying to stop these transnational criminal organizations. And when I was down there last month and got the briefing, they're better funded than we are on our side. They've got better technology, they've got drones, they've got weapons, they've got staff, they've got intel. They don't have anything. You know what we have on our side? We've got the Border Patrol is being defunded the same way the Democrats have defunded in some of the large cities. And I talked to the Border Patrol, and some of these it's like law enforcement families. I mean, many of them's like, how'd you get into the Border Patrol? Well, my father was in the Border Patrol. My son was in the Border Patrol. Anybody that can take early retirement in the Border Patrol has, because they're not getting to do law enforcement. And even when I'm down there, the only people on the border, we had a separate set of North Dakota troops. They're actually out on the border. They're actually doing the, intercepting people and doing the interventions. I'm like, where's the Border Patrol when I've been down there? They're like, well, they're back doing paperwork. I'm not talking computer work, I'm talking paperwork. And we've processed through into this country 6.5 million people since Joe Biden took office. 6.5 million. It's hard for any of us to go, what does that number look like? That's every man, woman, and child in the state of Maine, the state of New Hampshire, the state of Vermont, Rhode Island, Joe Biden's home state of Delaware, and then throw in Montana. That's the number of people. Think of those states having no people, and now they have the population they have now. That's who've come through. And then I'm in the briefing, and I'm like, what's that on the board? What's that acronym? Oh, those are known gotaways. That number right now stands at 1.5 million. I said, what's a known gotaway? Well, we see them on camera, but nobody intercepts them and they just keep going. And so we don't know where they are. Well, the ones that we've given the papers to in a bus ticket, you get a bus ticket to New York, you get off in Columbus, Ohio, nobody knows that. I mean, it's like, there's no tracking. So we basically have an invasion going on. And then of course, the First Lady courageously shares her story all the time. She's been in recovery for 21 years, so this is an important, issue for her. But we're losing 300 Americans a day. We're taking mass casualties to overdoses. 70% of those are fentanyl poisoning, and we have a situation now where if you add all that up from when Biden took office, it's the equivalent of 5 Vietnams. When I say mass casualties, 5 Vietnams. And if we had a plane crash today where 300 people died, and tomorrow 300 more died, and the next day 300, and they were all people that were sons and daughters and nieces and nephews and moms and dads, America would be, outraged. We'd be like, no, we've got to stop it. Come on, there's got to be some role here. Make this thing stop. And then meanwhile, I'm not getting on a plane. I'm not buying a plane ticket till it stops. But we lose 300 people a day to overdose deaths, and it won't be on the news tonight. And and it's just going on and on and on. So we have to fix the border. Absolutely, that has to happen. So I've got experience there because people talk about when I'm president, I'll send troops. When I'm your president, we'll keep doing what we're already doing, is we're bringing the fight to them already. And when we talk about the global economy, everything right now is a global economy. We're in a Cold War with China. I've got other candidates that won't even acknowledge that. The Biden administration certainly won't acknowledge that. But in a Cold War with China, Reagan taught us how to win a Cold War. You got to get the economy sprinting. We got to have like 5% growth, not this 1%, not high inflation, not record interest rates. And of the people on the stage there, I've created more jobs than everybody else on the stage combined. I've got more international business experience than everybody else on the stage combined. I have been involved in starting more companies and funding more companies than everybody else on the stage combined. And so it's a little bit interesting. Like the other night, we're in the debate and they're asking about the economy, the border, about China. And no one's asking me a question. And I think it's a little bit where if you're from the Midwest, you just say, look, it's kind of like when you have great sports teams, but they're not on the East Coast, and they're not in the SEC, nobody covers them. You got great athletes. I mean, there's a little bit of that going on, and I know there's a lot of folks that are cheering for the Heartland, because maybe it's about time that we had a Western governor that could ride in there and fix some of these problems that have been created by those in D.C.
When you're talking about the number of people coming across the border, I think we have 3.2 million residents in Iowa. So
two Iowas.
It's 2 Iowas.
Yes, it is. In 2.5 years.
In just 2.5 years.
And think of what it takes to feed, clothe, house, school 2 Iowas. I mean, take all of Iowa's budget times 2 and go, who's paying for that? Taxpayers are paying for that. And I talked about the 10th Amendment. There are many things the federal government is not supposed to do. Border security is like on the top of the list because national security is border security. Mm-hmm. Border security is also food security and energy security. And the Biden administration is not doing that. They're fighting farmers and they're fighting the U.S. Oil and gas industry. So they're not doing the job that they're meant to do.
Our conversation with Governor Doug Burgum continues, led by Gentry Collins, CEO of the American Free Enterprise Chamber of Commerce.
Governor, you've got an extraordinary story as an entrepreneur and as a governor. At the American Free Enterprise Chamber, one of the things that we see that is a real concern on the horizon is that next generation American consumers and voters, and therefore next generation American leaders, are starting to abandon the idea that free enterprise is the way of the future. We see a rising number of younger consumers who are flirting with democratic socialism and even worse. Many of them don't know that in one American century we more than doubled global human life expectancy and exponentially reduced poverty. They just don't know that story. One of the great advantages of the presidency is the bully pulpit. How might you use as president the bully pulpit to bring that next generation of Americans along and sort of put us back on track in terms of being proud of what we've done and proud of where we can go if we open another American century?
Well, I love the fact that you're using, Gentry, the word bully pulpit, because in North Dakota we are building a presidential library for Theodore Roosevelt, another audacious thing that we're doing, but building it at the entrance to the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. And he did set up the American century. He rewrote the rules to make sure that capitalism could thrive, make sure that capitalism worked for everyone as you described. And then we just take a look at the last 20 to 30 years, both in the United States and globally, with the innovation that came from the United States, free markets, and the technology that came from American companies took 1 billion people out of poverty worldwide. And people say, well, why do we care about that? That's their problem. No, when we take someone out of poverty over there, they start buying more stuff from the U.S. The world becomes, safer. I mean, having people out of poverty is not good for dictators and bad guys and bullies and mob bosses. I mean, when you raise it for everyone, it's not just the right thing to do. It's also really good for our country. So I do share your concern, but I have some hope. We call it the best of America because I see everywhere. I meet young entrepreneurs. I spoke at a tech conference last week. The ideas and there's another generation of people that are out there, but we've got to get the government off the backs of entrepreneurs, innovators, small businesses, families. We have to, because that's what's choking us. Red tape is choking people's ability to actually get out and do job creation. And we know who creates jobs. It's small businesses and innovators. That's who's creating most of the jobs in this country. And then we got on the flip side, we got the Biden administration with their push towards all electric vehicles. I mean, I lay the whole UAW strike that's going on right now at the feet of Joe Biden. He can go walk with stand on the picket line, but they need to understand that it's his policies that are going to say, we're going to start getting our engines from China. Because if you don't need an engine and all you need is a battery, and China controls 85% of the rare earth minerals, we're basically outsourcing our entire industry to a country that we're in a Cold War with. I mean, that makes absolutely no sense. And then you're just like, oh, well, then we're gonna not produce. We're gonna attack oil and gas. Oh, well, you know who loves that? OPEC. Mm-hmm. OPEC loves that. Russia loves that. Why would they love that? Well, because if we're not in the market, they get to fill that demand. And you know what they fill it with? They fill it with dirty oil that is not being produced as cleanly as here. So any of folks that think that the world is going to be a cleaner place because of the Biden energy policies is just wrong. Because if you cared about the environment, you'd want to have every ounce of energy produced here.
Let me follow up on that. To have free enterprise in America, you need to be able to move people and goods, right? One of the foundational issues. The Biden administration and the left generally in the country are openly attacking that ability with internal combustion engine bans, electrification mandates. One of my concerns, Governor, is that I think those threats are closer than most Americans are aware. As you may know, as early as this January in the state of California, a fleet operator may not replace a vehicle with another internal combustion engine. So these things are not happening way out on the distant horizon. They're happening now, and we're a little behind the curve, frankly. How, as president, do you put us back on track? How do you pull that back and get us headed in a different direction?
Well, some of these policies you're talking about, Gentry, are absolutely absurd. California is passing that law, and I was in California last fall for a wedding, trying to watch an NDSU Bison football game because I didn't want to miss that. It was on the same afternoon, a Saturday afternoon. I'm trying to find out how to watch that online. And then it comes on, and there's an ad that says, here's what you do to get ready for a blackout. It was like in October. It wasn't January when it was 20 below, and it wasn't the middle of August, July when it was 110 and everybody's using the air conditioning. It was in October, and there was a California Public Service announcement on how to prepare for blackouts and brownouts. And I'm like, this is America in this year, in this century, that our grid is so unstable. So the guys that want to go all EV in California especially, they don't have the power to run the grid because they're shutting down all the base load. Right. And then they're importing in California, the same as New England. In New England, at the time of the Russian invasion, there was 400,000 barrels of oil a day equivalent of dirty Russian heating oil being offloaded. New Hampshire, 41% of the homes are heated with heating oil. Not natural gas, not propane, heating oil, which is way dirtier than any of this other stuff. Why? Because New York will not let clean natural gas from the Marcellus in Pennsylvania get shipped in New England. So it increases our dependence. They're saying these things you're talking about, mandates, do this, do that, can't do that. That's actually making the environment worse. In California, you can't get a pipeline built to California from the Permian Basin in Texas and New Mexico. So they're offloading oil and gas every day, often from foreign suppliers in Long Beach. At the same time, they're trying to ban internal combustion machines to have everybody go to EV, and they don't have the grid to power that. There's less than 5% of the cars in California today are EV, and they're already putting out warnings telling people don't plug your car in during these times because we don't have enough power. Well, if they plug them all in, then the local transformers actually wear out faster, the ones in your neighborhood. If all of a sudden everybody in your neighborhood, it wasn't built for everybody charging their car overnight. Those transformers were built for resting overnight. So it is going to raise costs. And again, the inflation. You can't subsidize cars and subsidize the batteries and subsidize the purchase because we're subsidizing a particular type of car, a car with an EV engine. Right. I mean, so the strike, inflation, all of these things can go back and traced right back to Biden's policy. So part of how we have to turn it around is we have to go 180-degree direction differently on EVs, on energy. That will start getting the inflation down. And when we get inflation down, then we can start getting entrepreneurs back because they can afford. What entrepreneur? A young person today can't even afford to buy a house. How do they dare take the risk of starting a company? Right.
Questioning continues now, led by Rob Mudd of Mudd Advertising.
Governor, thank you very much for coming and being with us today. My family, Mudd Advertising, we work in the car industry. And one of the concerns is obviously China. And back in 2014, I was fortunate to do some work and took me over to China. And one of the things that was starting up then was Tesla and the electrification of cars. And we were getting a tour, and I said, hey, how do you guys make your electricity? We burn oil. Well, they burn coal, As soon as they said that, you knew that this was, this environmental thing was a fraud. It's not real. You know, the average combustible engine car has 34,000 moving parts. The average electric car has 2,300, and they don't move. The underbody for an electric vehicle can go 1 million miles. So none of this makes any sense. None of it makes certainly economic sense. I question why would we do it, but what would you do? I like your stance on China. Exactly what you said the other night is 100% correct. How do you resonate that message with the rest of America?
Well, first of all, we just have to keep saying what's true is we're in a Cold War with China.
I think it could escalate to something even more than that.
It could easily escalate to more than that because we're in a cyber war every day. I mean, we're being attacked by them, just not with, kinetic military, but there are attacks going on. And I know that because of my time in software. I know that because they stole all the software that we were building in every company I was ever involved in. And I also know it as a governor because we've built one of the strongest cyber defense teams in the nation. We're helping our tribes, we're helping our school districts, we're helping our cities and communities. We're even helping our neighbors now with a multi-state ops center to try to do this. But every day, North Korea, Russia, Iran, China, they pay people. They get up and they go to work, and their job is attack American infrastructure, attack the American military, attack that from happening. And your thing about the China thing, this week, I'm so happy that you know this, Rob. I'm so happy somebody knows it. Washington Post wrote an article this week praising China about that their adoption of EVs was faster than the U.S. Look at them. Every one of those cars is being powered by coal. 2 years ago when I was talking about this, China was opening up a coal plant every two a month. This last year, they opened up one a week. They will open up more coal plants than we can shut down. And our coal plants have the latest technology. You take out the NOx, the SOx, the CO2. I mean, we could have completely decarbonized baseload from a coal plant in the United States today, as opposed to disrupting our grid. That technology is available. They don't have that. They're building. You know why they're building them? They're building them because they have people that don't have electricity. They have people that are burning wood in their homes to cook. And so, of course, China's not going to stop building coal plants.
Well, they're also building American cars that they've taken from the plants that we built over there from Ford and General Motors, rebadging them, recreating their own because they're 51% owners of their businesses over there, and reselling them. So not only are the Chinese trying to take away what arguably could be the car business made America, right? They're trying to destroy our car business because they could never get a car in the United States because of emission problems. They'd never do it. But what could they get into the United States? Electric battery.
Yes. Yeah, and when they're making those electric batteries, I said rare earth minerals are called rare earth because they're measured in parts per million. You need millions of pounds to get the material. It can take over 100,000 pounds of earth mined and processed to get enough to make one battery. And so you see the pictures of what they're doing in Central Africa, what they're doing in Indonesia. This is the kind of stuff that every environmentalist in America says that they've been opposed to, which is, we're not going to destroy the planet, because of mining, because there's an assault on all forms of mining. Well, guess who's doing more mining than anyone else right now? The world's largest polluter, China. The world's largest emitter of CO2, China. Who's done the most to reduce this in the last 50 years in the world? The USA. The USA has always led in this thing. So why people are hating on America when we're the ones that are absolutely the best at protecting the global environment? So I said every electron, every ounce of base load, every ounce that goes into a car ought to be built, it ought to be created in the U.S. Our energy industry is the savior of the environment as well as the savior of our economy. And guess when you do that, it also stabilizes the world, because Putin does not invade Ukraine unless all of Western Europe is dependent on his energy. That's why he was able to go in there. We had no deterrence. He had all the playing cards, and now we're scrambling. Now we're scrambling as a country the last 12 months to start resupply Europe. Europe would have frozen last year if we hadn't been shipping liquid natural gas from the United States. We may not be able to do that in the future because the Biden administration is crushing the capital markets, and we're underinvesting by $150 billion a year in refineries, in production. And then he wonders why the price goes up. He says it's these greedy oil companies. No, the price is going up for oil because they're crushing supply. If you crush supply and demand doesn't go down, the price is going to go up. Come on, that's what less supply, equal or higher demand, prices go up. The Biden administration must not know this, and they are responsible for the inflation that's choking every American family.
Well, they're also they're responsible for the UAW strike.
Yes,
100%, because the UAW knows that they're not going to. If it only takes 2,300 parts to run a car, and it was 34,000. That's a big delta, right?
Yes.
And so what are the people going to do that we're supporting? So for every one auto worker, there's 7 folks that supply the auto industry. They're ultimately going to destroy our economy. Yeah, there's no other way to do it.
Could be 2/3 less workers required to pursue the Biden energy policy just for automobiles.
So,
and it would make the planet less environmentally safe. It would make the world more unstable, empowers dictators, and the environment's worse, and we lose jobs. It's all the above. It's an all of above energy strategy, apparently. Written by China is what I say.
I agree, 100%. Written by China, 100%, because they're the only ones that come out on the right side of this.
Yes.
Is China. So I like your policy. I like what you said. I like that you're telling the truth. You're very straightforward, very articulate, and people should listen to you because you're right.
Thank you, Rob.
We are midway through this Iowa Talking Points conversation with Republican presidential candidate Governor Doug Burgum. We'll take a short break so we can collect questions from the audience. We're back in just 2 minutes. And welcome back to Iowa Talking Points. I'm Jeff Stein from News Talk 1540 KXEL. In today's edition of the program, which was produced on Friday, September 29, 2023, we are in conversation with Republican presidential candidate and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. And we'll start this portion by introducing questions from our audience within Studio 5 at Mudd in Cedar Falls. So Governor, Butch would like to know, how much has the North Dakota oil business suffered under the Biden administration?
Well, it's been significant. We're producing about 1.2 million barrels of oil a day. Pre-Biden, it was 1.5. Part of this is the full-on attack. I mean, they are literally breaking the law. Every administration since Harry Truman has been following the law. The law says that on federal lands, land that was put away by Theodore Roosevelt for the benefit and the use of the American people, explicitly when that land was put away. That's the balance sheet of America for us to use. Not to like never set foot on, never, it's not like, oh, never cut a tree. I mean, TR never said that. TR said this is for the benefit and the use of American people. We have a administration that's required to hold a federal lease sale on BLM and other federal lands. Obama held it every quarter for 8 years. Biden took office, first quarter, second quarter, third, nobody's having, we're like, hey, where's the lease sales? Come on. We talked to them, oh yeah, no, don't worry, we'll do it. Then it doesn't happen. We had sued the federal government, the state of North Dakota. We won in court this summer, 84-page ruling. Now we're 2.5 years into it, and then they are appealing. They're like appealing. You break the law and they're appealing. So it is like, it's clear. I mean, the judge in the report said the law says the federal government must hold it. It doesn't say maybe or under these conditions. And so the whole thing is a farce. They're literally breaking the law to try to execute on their strategy of attacking. They've gone way beyond where Obama went in terms of trying to do that. And when you do that, then the thing that's most infuriating to families in North Dakota is governor, because when we were heading into the midterms and prices were going up at the pump because we're constraining American supply, prices are going up, what does Biden do? Biden, without any authorization, because he has the executive power to do it, takes the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and runs it in half. We're draining our Strategic Petroleum Reserve is for World War III. It's not for, hey, let's get prices down before the midterm elections. You know who's stockpiling and building up their Strategic Petroleum Reserve? China. So we're draining ours, they're building theirs as we're heading towards a potential World War III with a competitor like China. So it's putting our country at risk as well as hurting our economy. And then now to add all this, insult to injury, when the production was down, the State Department went to Venezuela, a corrupt country that 7.5 million people have fled Venezuela, the human rights violations, the human trafficking, all that. They went there and said, could you produce more to help us with the pump? He goes himself to the Middle East and is fist bumping people saying, could you produce more? And they looked at him and they said, no, we're going to restrict production. They did the opposite of what he was asking. Because why? Because they're upset because of his deal with Iran. He gave $6 billion last week to Iran, the largest sponsor of terrorism in the world, in a hostage trade. We got 5 hostages, they got 5 hostages, but they also got $6 billion. And with that $6 billion, they can use that to build their rocket capability. They're providing drones to Russia already, but they'll be able to, their whole mission, death to USA, death to Israel. I mean, that's what they want to do. And we're giving them money. And that's also breaking the law, because there was a law passed in 2015 that said that the president cannot cut a nuclear deal with Iran without the approval of Congress, and he's calling it a hostage thing, but he's basically he's going back and doing the Obama nuclear deal, but calling it something else. Mm-hmm. So the lawlessness is incredible, but then meanwhile, you're the governor of North Dakota, and I'm talking to families in Williston who are out of work because oil production is down because of the attack of the U.S. government on us, and they get to watch the news and see the President of the United States, Joe Biden, going over and saying, could you guys produce more energy? So it's not just how it's hurting our economy and hurting U.S. whatever. It is destabilizing the world, and it should be an affront to every American.
John notes that on my radio program, he heard a financial advisor say we are headed toward a digital dollar. He says, heaven help us. What say you?
Well, there's a lot of risk right now, and it ties back to the conversation we're talking about. Part of the strength of our ability to survive economic shock has been the strength of the dollar. It's the reserve currency that other nations hold because it's the most stable currency and the most trusted currency in the world. And one of the reasons why was because all of the petrodollar exchanges, if you had two countries, one that was, trading in euros and somebody else is, trading in kroner, it went through the US dollar for them because oil was always priced in dollar. Well, now since the Ukraine war, China's paying Russia in yuan, other people are paying them in gold bars, India's in there. Now the BRIC countries are talking about creating an alternative global currency. And all of this could be the music that begins that when the music stops and there's no chairs when you're playing musical chairs, because the both parties that have participated in, it's okay if we spend more than we take in, it's okay if we have these huge fiscal deficits that we're having, that's okay, we'll just cover it with printing money. Well, A, you get inflation, but B, if at some point nobody wants the dollar as reserve currency, it's game over for us operating. We're going to have leadership that knows how to actually, like we did in North Dakota, cut spending, like actual real cuts, not slowing down, cut spending, balance budgets, make government more efficient. But we should do that. Why wait till we have a crisis on the dollar?
Gene asks what you can say about the destruction of our American Christian culture, and related to that but separate, how can we influence schools to return to what she is terming real education, such as literacy, history, character, and those key points?
Well, let me start with the schools, because this is an important one, and we're happy to see that in North Dakota, they came out with who's got the highest, median SAT scores in the country, North Dakota right at the top. And one of the things that we've been doing in North Dakota, which you have to do in a rural, I know school choice is, I absolutely 100% support it, behind it all the way, make it happen. But in some of these rural areas, you're not going to have in a small rural school like I went up to, you're not going to have 2 schools in that town. You got to have one good one. And so we said, look, we're going to take every public school in the state and we're going to basically create a set of red tape reduction where every school can be an innovation school. Every school can be school choice. Every school can have all the things they want. But we also have to be focusing on who's the customer. The customer is the family and the student. And what do the students need to do? They need to be ready to participate in the 21st century. And we spent a lot of the last century saying our schools had to get kids ready for college. Well, then they went to college. And what happened at college? You want to talk about indoctrination, where you've got a line of thinking being taught at a lot of the colleges, which is in line with, socialism and not free markets. And then we end up with $1.6 trillion of student debt because the federal government decided to get heavily into subsidizing higher education. We said, no. We said, it's going to be choice ready. So the students in North Dakota, they're ready for the military, they're ready for the career and technical education, or ready for college. Choice ready. They have to be ready for one of those 3. Beautiful if they're ready for 3 of those 3. But we really have had to beef up what we're doing on career and technical, because that's the place where we can have great careers. So we have an opportunity. A high school kid today, I was talking to some in Bismarck last year. They completed their first year of a 2-year technical degree in high school. Okay, so they have that done. So now I'm going off to college. I'm fall of my freshman year. It's October of my freshman year. I've got less than 1 year to graduate. The 2 guys I was talking to already had $72,000 job offers for power plant management. They had no college debt. One of them had just, bought an F-150 and could make the payments because they gave them a signing bonus. It's like, okay, this is fantastic. No college debt. We're going to have workers filling jobs we need, and they got to start. And the money we put into K-12 helped get them there. So we're changing that. And on the faith side, I would just say super important. I grew up in a town, that had 300 people. We had 2 churches and 1 bar, and I was a family. We went to church every Sunday. Faith was a key part of what my mom and dad, and we would have never made it through losing my dad, and my mom would have never made it 34 years without him without that.
Final question from the audience before we return to questions from my colleagues. Can we protect U.S. land from foreign buyers, and if so, how specifically?
Well, I know we can do it because we're doing it in North Dakota, and we've had a anti-corporate farming law in North Dakota that's been as tight and as tough as any in the country. And as much as I'm enjoying this whole conversation, if the 4 of us in North Dakota said, hey, let's go farm together, we couldn't, because unless there's some secret family tree, we're not all related to each other. Second cousins are closer. So in North Dakota, if it's your third cousin, you can't farm together. You can't own land together. It's got to be, we have family farms and family farms only. And then there was a lot of misinformation this last winter that came out, like, oh, the Chinese are buying land next to the Grand Forks Farmland, next to Air Force Base. No, they can't buy it. Our legislature doubled down, and we said, hey, no, you absolutely, if you are unrelated parties, you can't own farmland. If you are a U.S. corporation, you can't own farmland. if you are a foreign country, you can't own farmland. If you're a foreign political partner, you can't own farmland. And so we've sort of doubled down on all those restrictions because I think it's essential for our country. But if we can do it in North Dakota, every state can figure out a way to make that happen too.
5 minutes of questioning now led by Gentry Collins of the American Free Enterprise Chamber of Commerce.
Governor, one of the issues that we hear from our small business and even bigger business members around the country is that the constantly increasing cost of health insurance is a real threat. In fact, so many of our small business members are struggling now even to provide good quality health care insurance, not to mention what's happening with prescription drug prices in the country. All of this now into a second decade of Obamacare that was supposed to reduce some of these costs. What does a Burgum administration do to start to rein in out of control increases in healthcare costs around the country?
Well, Gentry, I'm glad you asked this, and then you'd say, well, in my private sector experience, there was a period of time that I was an investor in and was chairman of a software company whose sole purpose was to help lower the cost of healthcare. And the fundamental way that you lower the cost of healthcare is you would have the healthcare system become more productive. If a doctor could see more patients per day, that would lower the cost. If a nurse in nurse facilities, if you could do that, a clinic, it's a function of productivity. And there's so many things that they're behind. Well, we had a plan, an idea, a product, and we were like rolling through. We even had the VA and a national contract that was going to improve services for VA. Along comes my story with Obama and Obamacare. He gets elected, and what do they pass in the this America Act that they were doing back in that time? $800 billion. Tucked in that was $30 billion of subsidy for a particular time software, electronic health records, which then the federal government was going to pay 80% of that. So they subsidized it. And then people were like, wow, the price of that software just went up by 80%. That's weird, because the government was paying for 80%, so it didn't save anybody anything. But then no one was using it. And then they came back and said, oh, we have to achieve meaningful use. Well, what happens if we don't? Well, if you don't, your Medicaid and other payments go down. So quietly over time, while everyone's fighting over Obamacare, which is a non-actuarial sound insurance policy, it's not an umbrella care policy for the America. It's for some people, and it has to be covered by federal payments because payments in don't equal the payments going out. So it's like, let's start an insurance company to lose money every year. That's all that Obamacare is money losing insurance. And people, it saves protection, all this stuff. No, it's a federal insurance company that loses money. But meanwhile, back at the actual delivery of care, where patients are meeting whatever, when they said, if you don't get this thing done by this date, we're not going to reimburse you the same way. All of IT across the entire industry said, we've got to get that in or we're not going to be around. So over a period of time, there was $1 trillion of IT consumed by the U.S. healthcare industry, more than any industry in the country during that time period, and they became less productive. At the end of the day, the doctors had their hands on a keyboard, dealing with a piece of software that made them less productive, during that time frame. And so you can trace all of this back to federal innovation. If there was actually competitive forces, which you believe in and your organization believes in, if we had that, we might actually start seeing costs go down. So when I'm your president, someone brings me a bill, the first question I'm going to ask, which never gets asked by, everyone's like, should we spend more or should we spend less? Should we insure more, insure less? The question is, does this piece of legislation improve the productivity of this industry? And if the answer is no, then why are we even talking about it? You're just pitching for votes. You're not actually trying to solve it. We spend over 20% of our entire economy. It's $4 trillion and growing we spend on healthcare, and we don't have better outcomes. This isn't a spending problem, America. It's not a spending problem. It's a results problem. It's an output problem. And you have to have someone who's a business person that would actually understand that. And it's gotten so that other people are saying, why would I go into medicine today? We have more doctors retiring today than we've got people coming out of school, and we're going to have a labor shortage in medicine. They have to become more productive.
What you've described is true, I think, not just in healthcare, but across governments, even if you say well-intentioned efforts to intervene in the marketplace. One example of that, when Bill Clinton declared the era of big government over in 1996, I say that's the last time both major parties agreed we had too much, okay? The day he did that, we had 9,200 federal regulations on the books. Today, we have 120,000 federal regulations on the books. Republican and Democratic presidencies, there's not a year since where we've had fewer than 3,000 new federal regulations take effect. How does your administration turn that tide and start to peel back the weight and complexity and cost of the administrative state in America?
Well, this is a centerpiece of what we're going to do, because it said at the beginning, this is innovation, not regulation. I mean, we've got a belief that somehow regulation at the federal level, which always means one size fits all, is going to solve the problem. Right now, there's over 20 rulemaking processes, which I view as an assault on American energy and American agriculture and American business, that we are pushing back on in North Dakota. U.S. Fish and Wildlife has got some. Bureau of Land Management's got 4 different ones. EPA, long list. We assemble cross-government teams. They work. We provide comments. We get ready to lawsuit. We allocate dollars at the state level to sue the federal government, and we go after it, because someone has to fight back against this growth and this push. Waters of the USA, North Dakota was the tip of the spear in getting that stayed. That was going to affect 95% of the farmland in North Dakota. And I'm telling you, whoever wrote that didn't leave their office in Washington, D.C. They could never have been on the ground in North Dakota to understand how we're doing it. And nobody cares more about the land, the water, the air quality, the soil health than these multi-generational farmers that are living there, their families, because they want it to be the next generation, the next generation. They want it to go just like our tribes, the next 7 generations. We want it to be great. So it has to be a centerpiece, innovation, not regulation. It's the only way we win the Cold War with China, is for us to innovate. Regulating ourselves is a path to failure and a path to decline. Innovation is a path to success and a path to a bright future.
Amen.
Final few moments with Rob Mudd of Mudd Advertising.
So, Governor, we've had quite a few presidential candidates come through our place and be on the show. And a lot of them have had different comments on how they would go about fixing the government when they got there. How do you figure that you're going to find the right people to be around you when you're there? Because it seems that if you don't have the right people and you're reliant on DC, the swamp area, to find those people, well, you don't get anywhere. So how would you bring what you've done in North Dakota with those same type folks to orchestrate your plan?
Well, love the question, because any success I've been involved with, and I've been involved with multiple, multiple IPOs, multiple global software companies, multiple big companies, it comes down to 2 things. You got to attract the capital, but the amount of capital doesn't matter if you don't attract high-performing teams. And that's what we've done in North Dakota. Part of how we've been able to achieve, lowering costs and improving services is with high-performing teams. I went to all the cabinet leaders when I got there and said, and agency heads, and said, thank you for your service. If you want to keep going in our administration, it's going to be at a higher gear, it's going to be faster, we're going to be reducing regulation, focusing on innovation, focusing on transformation leadership. If you want to be part of that, great, reapply. And because we're going to be posting these externally. And we brought in a bunch of people externally. Now at the federal level, it's a different thing. And one of the things that you'd say, well, why was Obama effective in erasing quickly the Bush 8 years? There's 4,000 jobs that the President of the United States gets to appoint. Obama came in and they took out all 4,000 of those Bush appointees and they put in all of theirs. When we had a brief moment to be in charge in 2016, that didn't happen. I mean, talk to some of the cabinet leaders that were leading. They might have had 80 positions. 2.5 years in, they had 40 of them filled. We have to be ready on day one. Chris Liddell, who worked in the Trump administration in the White House, he was the CFO of one of the large global companies I was with. He's writing a book called Year Zero. Year 0 is the year before you become president. When the voting starts here in Iowa, we'll be starting to assemble our team. We will have the list of all the candidates in the country across industry that'll be ready to go, that have said, I will leave my job in the private sector. I will come to work for you, Doug Burgum, just like I've got people on our campaign right now. I've got multiple CEOs and chairmen who literally are quitting their jobs to come to work right now on this campaign. They're supporting with a donation, they're supporting with their time, and they've quit their jobs. These are people that I've worked with 10 and 20 and 30 years ago, and they're like, wow, you're running? I want to be part of this thing, because we know what happens when you get going on something. And so that's what we're going to have to do, is be ready to go right away, drive those appointments in, because you only transform organizations when you have transformative leadership at the top, and we have to have a whole group of people that are ready to go back and fight against the deep state.
How would you work with the military? I have a pretty good feeling of how you're going to answer this one. But that's has gotten weaker. Biden has done what he's done, and we need to get back there. So what is going to be your plan on re-strengthening our military?
Well, I would just tell you that one of the greatest honors of being the governor of the state of North Dakota is being the Commander-in-Chief of the North Dakota National Guard. We've had troops deployed continuously overseas in combat zones, since the beginning of War on Terror. We've had troops deployed down on the border. We've got troops that are on active duty all the time in northern North Dakota, working hand in hand with the U.S. Air Force to protect 150 or more, Minuteman missile silos doing the ground defense. And I was just a couple weeks ago, I was in the Portsmouth Naval Yard for the change of command for the USS North Dakota, which is the historic naval ceremony where they change, who's in charge of the boat, as they call those, those nuclear submarines. It is so important that we have a president that actually understands and honors and respects the military. In North Dakota, we have made a commitment that we're going to be the most military-friendly state in the nation. With the Minot Air Force Base and the Grand Forks Air Force Base, we are on the tip of the spear. 2 of the 3 of the nuclear triad, both missile, wing, and nuclear aircraft, are based in North Dakota. We have got to rebuild the pride, just like we have to in law enforcement. Part of the reason why we've got these challenges in our country is that we've stopped a country. My family, my kids, and I, whenever we see someone in law enforcement at an airport, on the street, highway patrolman, whatever, the first thing I do is I go up and I say, thank you for your service. They are the thin blue line, and the military has got a super important role for us. We are literally heading towards the crisis, which could be World War III. We have 3 children. I never thought I'd be talking to them about the possibility of a war like that, but you look at all the indicators of what's going on, and it's real. It's real. It's absolutely real. And the other thing, back on innovation, meeting with some small defense contractors, about 40% of the U.S. small defense contractors have gone out of business in the last 10 years because they don't have enough lawyers to navigate the procurement process, which chokes them out. And then the big ones that are in cahoots with the government, those guys win all the contracts. We've got to get the innovation back in. We could cut costs and lower the cost in delivery. And it's important because if we don't have a military industrial base, which people, throw complaints against and do that, but we're in a situation right now where the way you have strength through peace is with deterrents that work. We did not have deterrents in place, otherwise Putin wouldn't have gone. He would never have gone into Ukraine. But now we have Taiwan. And the Biden's talking about, we might give them Harpoon missiles. That's an anti-tank. Or an anti-ship missile that's very effective and very accurate. We make them. If you were on a ship, you'd be very worried about someone having Harpoon missiles. We're like, we're going to give them to Taiwan in 2027 if we can get them manufactured, if we can get through the procurement process. Maybe it'll be 28. If you're the Chinese, then you say, let's go before 27 then. Yeah. Let's go before the Harpoon missiles are there. That's not a hard call. That's an easy call. Let's go. And they have the world's largest navy, 360 ships, and 30% of the world's commerce now transects through the South China Sea between Taiwan and China. They could overnight totally disrupt. It'd be like, what happens with Taiwan? Well, what happens when 30% of world trade gets disrupted overnight? Then you want to see inflation happen in the U.S.? Check that out. A Harpoon missile will look like the biggest bargain that we never bought if we let that happen. People do not understand the impact it would have on American lives if we don't defend freedom and trade around the world that is in our best interest. It's in our best interest if we'd have to do that. So anyway, we're in a risky spot, and it's being made riskier by the current administration.
We are close to the end of our time, but I want to give you the last 2 minutes to make your case directly to Iowa voters.
Well, first of all, I'm going to just start with a thank you, Jeff and Gentry and Rob, for being here for this discussion. And I want to thank all Iowans as well, because Catherine and I are honored to be here campaigning, honored to meet all the people we've met on the ground, and grateful for how invested people are in understanding the choices that we have and how important they are for our country. But I would just say on behalf of Catherine as well, she's a big city girl. She grew up in Jamestown, North Dakota, almost 15,000 people. But she grew up in a John Deere dealership, and I'll never forget our the first day here, our first event. We were, talking to a group of local business people, farmers, implement dealers, bankers, in an implement dealer shop. and it was the very first morning. We'd announced the next day before in Fargo, and she said, what am I going to say? And I'm like, well, hey, you go first, I'll go first. Anyway, we're having this kind of little thing when you're just jumping in, and she said, well, hey, okay, and then she addressed the group and she said, hey, when I walked in here this morning, I loved the way it smelled. And 100 Iowa farmers looked at her dumbfounded, like, what is she talking about? And then she said, well, our family had a John Deere dealership, and I grew up sweeping the floors, mowing the lawns, selling parts with my sisters, and when I walked in here this morning, it smelled like home. And then later she worked for Bobcat as a market manager for Bobcat. And so when we were at the World Pork Expo, they said, well, have you been here before? And of course you haven't, thinking that. She said, no, I used to work this show. And they said, really? And I said, yeah, I worked for Bobcat. And then for real. And then she goes, I was in charge of the manure market. And so, of course, there's a lot of that in the pork business. And so she's an expert in certain things. Anyway, Catherine and I have loved being here. And I just want to say, if you're interested in someone who's had incredible success in the private sector, who understands small towns, understands the global challenges, understands energy and agriculture, biofuels, ethanol, all of that, which is critical to our future. If you want someone who understands that, understands you, and understands how inflation is choking you, and then we're running on the economy, on energy and national security, just what we've talked about here. And by the way, this was probably more helpful to voters than the entire Republican debate the other night. So good job to the moderators tonight. More issues of substance that really matter to Americans in our future. So with that, I just want to say again, thank you to everybody, and we look forward to earning your support. We'd love to have your support. If you want to learn more, go to dougburgum.com. We'd love to have you caucus with us in January.
Governor, thank you. And that brings us to the close of Iowa Talking Points, this edition of the program featuring a conversation with Republican presidential candidate and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. Again, campaign website is dougburgum.com. Today's program produced on Friday, September 29th, 2023, within Studio 5 at Mudd in Cedar Falls. Thanks as always to our panelists, Gentry Collins, CEO of the American Free Enterprise Chamber of Commerce, and Rob Mudd, Chief Futurist at Mudd Advertising. Go to iowatalkingpoints.com for more information on future events, which will be live streamed and available via video on demand at iowatalkingpoints.tv and, of course, aired on News Talk 1540 KXEL. I'm Jeff Stein. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Iowa Talking Points.